he made, here was a car that with a few cents, maybe a few dollars, maybe less than 20, could have been quite a breakthrough and wouldn't have had the problems that it later was seen to have on the highway. What was interesting is that in researching the Corvair, I went down to the patent office and I discovered this patent by the most famous suspension engineer in the history of General Motors, Maurice Oley. It's called O-L-E-Y, and it was issued in 1959. That's strange, the same year, Corvair. And he said, this is what he said of the Corvair type suspension. He didn't say Corvair type suspension in the patent. Quote, the ordinary swing axle under severe lateral forces produced by cornering tends to lift the rear end of the vehicle so that both wheels assume severe positive camber position to such an extent that the vehicle not only oversteers, but actually tends to roll over. In addition, the effect is nonlinear and increases suddenly in a severe turn, thus presenting potentially dangerous vehicle handling characteristics. End quote. So, as someone said in Car and Driver, the Corvair presents a real challenge to driving expertise. So I am convinced, just from that deduction, that in this room are some of the best drivers in America. I've had so many Corvair owners come up to me over the years and say, if you drive cheaply, if you have the tire differential pressures proper between rear and front, and if you make sure that you look at the road you're driving, and if you don't drive too fast, you'll be okay. Well, as you know, the Corvair was sold to the average driver, very much of it. It was not viewed as a sports car in the sense of only sports car bus. But here's what it contributed. Oh, by the way, there's one good thing about the Corvair. One good thing. And that is, did you notice the controversy over fuel tank placements? Pinto fuel tanks, so on, over the years. And so many cars were built with the fuel tank in a vulnerable position to rear-end impact. And of course, the Pinto was the worst. It was the closest to the points of impact. It was not forward to the rear axis. The Corvair fuel tank is in a safety zone protected by the adjacent axle, used as a good example. It was used as a good example in the Pinto fuel tank litigation. That was considered, well, here's how you could do it. And Ed Cole had the patent on that fuel tank. However, there was, as everything often occurs with the Corvair, although the fuel tank was okay, here's what internal GM Proving Ground report PG 11285 said, quote, the rubber connection hose at the gasoline tank sending unit failed during the test, and gasoline spillage was excessive. So, even there, it has to be qualified. Anyway, 1965, the book comes out, late 65. 66, the Senate hearings get underway, and then the question is, what did GM do about the Corvair design? What it knew and when did it know? Did it know that there were problems? Was there debate before the car came out about the suspension system? How long did they know that there was a dual-link suspension system, which they put in 65 to greatly improve the stability? This was interesting in the sense that Congress has to have things that are specific. When you're talking, you can't just go out and Congress say, well, auto safety is needed in the country. They're going to say, well, give examples. So we gave the example of Pontiac Tempest, which had that propensity to catch on a railroad crossing and stop the car. The driver kept moving. That was a very notorious case. So we had these cases before the Senate committee, later before the House committee. Now, mind you, this giant industry was brought under regulation in 6 months. It's almost a record. Today, we can't even regulate the S&L industry properly in years, even though we're paying $500 billion for the bailout. But the first hearings were in March '66, and President Johnson signed the motor vehicle and highway safety laws, 2 laws, at the same time. He signed them into law in September of the same year. So there was tremendous speed in Congress to get this done. And one of the reasons was that General Motors inadvertently helped all the way. It made almost every blunder, every mistake, every attempt to cover up that could be made. When they were asked, do you ever recall cars? And they said, well, no, we really don't recall cars. They just send notices out to dealers and say, well, if someone comes back with this car that they bought from your dealership, fix it, but don't tell them. When it turned out that thousands and thousands of cars were involved in these secret but very incomplete recalls, the senators were pretty outraged. They were all looking to see where their cars had been recalled. And the process moved quite quickly. Now the 2 laws have been irregularly enforced. As we all know, different presidents have different views about enforcing safety regulations. And under Nixon and Reagan, there wasn't much activity, to put it mildly. But about 200,000 lives can really be attributed to been saved by the 1966 motor vehicle laws. In this country alone, quite apart from the impact on Canada, Western Europe, and Japan, to get their cars up to snuff and recall more of them. Secondly, there's a lot more research and development done. There are more engineers and scientists working in the industry on safety. They have more technical conferences. Third, there were over 100 million, well over 100 million cars recalled since 1967. Probably closer to 160 million cars, including Rolls Royces and Mercedes. And generally speaking, if it was given half a chance, these laws would have brought up our automotive technology in terms of fuel efficiency, bumper protection against damage, low-speed collisions, keep insurance rates down, and the all-important accident prevention and crashworthiness. We would now have doubled the number of lives. We're going to say 400,000 American lives. You consider 360,000 Americans lost their lives in World War II, the biggest casualty war apart from the Civil War in our history. You can see the magnitude of the saving. Ed Cole, in August 1970, wrote a letter to the Department of Transportation as head of GM. And he said he's going to put airbags in all GM light trucks, vans, and cars by the fall of 1974. That's 1975, model year. Unfortunately, he was born 2 years too early because he had to retire mandatorily in '73. And his successors completely reversed the GM policy, and the rest of the industry followed suit against the airbag. Now recall, one of your earlier meetings, about 20 years ago, something came out of your meeting, and the airbag was called asinine. I remember. I always remember. The airbag can be viewed 2 ways, ideologically. It can be viewed as Ronald Reagan viewed it when he opposed it in 1980 in the campaign trail, as an instant interference with your freedom to go through a windshield. Or it could be viewed as an instant preservation of your freedom to stay alive. You can imagine what side I came down. But the airbag took 20 years before it reached the point of irreversible installation. I think now it's irreversibly on its way to standard equipment, full front seat installation. There are even designs for smaller airbags on side collisions and rear seat airbags on the drawing boards. It's incredible what they can do with the airbags. You almost think of Pinocchio, Edgar Bergen. What he can do with his little model in terms of etc. It's just marvelous. Now, let me ask you a question. Does anybody here know who invented the airbag, or who invented a portion of the airbag? You know, we all know who invented the light bulb and the telephone, and some of us know who invented the xerography process, the cotton gin. We now don't know who invents these great life-saving devices, and they deserve recognition. We just talk in terms of auto companies, not in terms of invention. Well, it's an American, overwhelming American invention. Almost no patents are attributed to overseas invention. And the basic airbag was invented by about 3 inventors in the 1950s, although the first idea came in the very early 1940s. But now that Lee Iacocca has become a convert, and we are about to consider giving him the first annual Corporate Redemption Award. He was an arch enemy of the airbags. He was with Henry Ford in Nixon's office when he turned Nixon around on the airbag, which wasn't all that difficult. And Nixon ordered Ehrlichman to order Secretary of Transportation Volpe, who was a great enthusiast of airbags, to stop and put in this interlock system, which of course was a great boomerang, as everybody knew it would be. Well, Iacocca was an arch adversary of the airbag until May 1988, I think it was, or 89. I picked up the papers. There's this huge full-page ad which said, "Who says you can't teach an old dog new tricks?" And there was Lee Iacocca saying that he had been persuaded that the airbag is fine. He became the leading protagonist of the airbag, and he's personally quite touched now by it. I mean, he gets these letters from people who say there wouldn't be a life without the airbag in the Chrysler car. And he's met some of the survivors, and put some of them in the television ads. And while there is another reason for his promotion of the airbag, because what else does Chrysler have? One has to credit him with a susceptibility to humanitarian impulses. There's no doubt about it. Now they're all polished. Even GM announced 2.5 weeks ago it was going to put airbags as standard equipment on all 1994 model year cars, not yet light trucks and vans. But just think, this is 20 years after the president of GM himself, Ed Cole, said that airbags would be in all GM automobiles, light trucks and vans. And we can only sadly contemplate the number of families and individuals who lost their daughters and sons and mothers and fathers because Ed Cole wasn't born 2 years later and had 2 more years of his career before the mandatory age of 65 retired. One of the great accidents of history, and it just tells us how often these giant auto companies can be turned around one way or the other by just the person at the top. Just the person at the top going one way or the other. The idea that these are giant technocratically dominated bureaucracies is true, but not that true that the person at the top with a sense of responsibility cannot make the decisive difference. If any of you wondered why Allstate was a big supporter of airbags for years, even to the discomfort of the parent company Sears and to the outrage of some of the auto companies who felt they were being pushed too fast in Allstate ads on airbags, was because of 2 men, Arch Bowe, the CEO, and Vice President Don Schiff. When they left,